so it is officially time. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you here for NATA's Navigating the Part 5 Rule, What You Need to Know. I wanted to make a disclaimer up front that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We will be getting to these and are really excited to help be able to answer your question with the experts we have on today's panel. I am Jenny Ann Urban. I am NATA's Managing Director of Air Charter and Maintenance. And before I turn it over to the other panelists to introduce themselves, I wanted to mention we'll have more information about this at the end, but that on June 25th, NATA has our Air Charter Summit, and our headline speaker is actually going to be FAA Associate Administrator of Safety, David Bolter, as well as we will have the SMS office present and serving on an SMS panel. So they will also be there to answer your questions. It'll be a great chance to get really even more information on this new rule that came out. So please check that out. Check it out on NATA events, and we'll have a slide at the end to provide more information. But Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and give a brief background on NATA.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. And good afternoon, everyone. Keith DeBerry, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for NATA, National Air Transportation Association. And as many of you know, we just went through a rebranding. So we're referring to NATA. NATA is a leading national trade association representing the business interest of general aviation and business aviation service companies on a legislative and a regulatory front at the federal level, but we also provide education services and benefits to our members to help their long-term economic success. So Jenny Ann, on with the show.
Okay, over to you, Steve, to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Steve Berry, Vice President of Education and Safety for the newly rebranded NATA. Don't penalize us too much if we call ourselves NATA. It's a transition in progress, but formally we are a NATA, as Keith mentioned. And I oversee NATA's education and safety programs. Another large part of what NATA does in our advocacy role is we participate in standards bodies and boards to make sure that general aviation has a voice and a seat at the table. And that's what we do to advocate for each one of our members. Brandon, over to you.
Sure, Steve. Thanks for joining us, everybody. My name is Brandon Popovich. I'm the Manager of Safety and Training for NATA and Safety First. And what I do is day-to-day membership support through the Safety First program, as well as run and assist Steve with various workshops to include our quality control workshop. Newly implemented this year is our line service manager workshop. We have a de-icing workshop. I assist with all those workshops and also with other seminars and workshops around the industry, and looking forward to seeing everybody on the road.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And then we are very fortunate to have our special guest, Mr. Safety himself, Dale Whitmore. Dale, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Dale Whitmore, and I'm an ex-FAA guy, retired this past year in December of 2023. So as we go through our presentations today, forgive me if I sound like I'm still in the FAA because I haven't made that transition yet. It's like putting a 2023 on your 2024 check that you're writing out for your Consumers Power or whatever. But with that said, I don't represent the FAA anymore, but I have an in-depth knowledge. I've got about 45 years in the industry. My main background while I was in the private sector is 135. So I'm AMP, ATP rated, did the chief pilot, director of operations, and all the things that the operators do to comply with the 119 rules and interface with the FAA. So thank you very much to all the participants and from NATA for inviting me to engage with you all today. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dale. And just a reminder for those of you that have recently joined, please feel free to put your Q&A in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will do our best to get to all of those. So I know you all are here. You're probably thinking, get on with the show. So the new Part 5 SMS rule is out. And for our panelists, what is different now? And what do I need to know as a Part 135 operator?
That is a great question. As if anyone that has looked at the rule thus far is 160 pages, there's a lot of different things that are in there. One of the things that is just glaring is we're given an extended period of time to comply with the rule. So I think that's one thing, 3 years. One of the things that I would actually caution a lot of our members and certificate holders in doing is waiting till the 3 years is almost up. Because one of the things that is definitely going to change, the 135 operators are not going to be spoon-fed like the 121 operators were. They're not going to incrementally work with the FAA. Once you hand in what used to be the statement of compliance, and Brandon, what's that referred to now?
The rule changes to declaration of compliance.
Right. So once you hand that in, you're basically saying that you comply with the rule. The FAA is not going to rush out to do a surveillance activity or a certification activity. They're going to be looking at what you say is a completed SMS through normal routine surveillance activities. So that's just a couple of things that have changed. There's more. Any other panel would like to share some of their observations?
Sure, Keith. I think you pointed out one of the key distinctions, at least between the NPRM and the final rule that was published, was around that the distinction of terms, which is the declaration of compliance versus compliance statement. There's an additional component around a code of ethics in the new rule. Essentially, the new language is that a code of ethics is applicable to all employees, including management, personnel, and officers, which clarifies that safety is the organization's highest priority. So I think that's one of the new distinctions from the previous rule, is inclusion of that code of ethics, in addition to that compliance statement. One of the other areas around that code of ethics, really the key part is highest level of safety, or highest priority is kind of the key word. Is that correct, Dale? Is there anything that we wanted to emphasize there around the ethics side?
No, I think you covered it well. Pretty much Congress mandated that to be added into the rule. Yeah, we have to look at the history of the rule and how we really got started with regards to the 135 and the LOA holders. And it basically, the max is the focal point for the certification group, and Congress to be involved in expanding SMS, which provided good opportunity then for flight standards to include the 135 and 91 LOA holders. So with regards to that or what happens in the FAA is that Congress will set some requirements that we have no input on. And the code of ethics was one of those requirements. And another one of those requirements that would be added onto that was that the organization will not take punitive action against any person that would report a problem within the organization, which if you followed the MAX and the manufacturing history of that and the whistleblower and all that concept of people not speaking out when they knew something was wrong for fear of retribution, that kind of catalyst, the ethic piece, you shall not take punitive action against someone who speaks out with regards to safety issues, et cetera. So, no, I think you covered it very well.
Yeah, and I would say kudos to the FAA in that regard for including that ethics statement of code of ethics inclusion to address the non-punitive reporting component that is essential to SMS. One of the other key differences that we've highlighted from the old rule versus the new rule is under the old rule that applied only to the Part 121 world, the commercial airline world, they had to develop a system description as part of what was submitted to the FAA. The new rule, we no longer need a full system description. Instead, it's an organizational summary. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that looks like?
With regards to the organizational summary or the organizational system description, I know that the FAA is going to publish some additional materials on or about May 28th of this month, which is going to provide a lot more examples and basically intent of the rule to go along with the preamble. Sometimes the preamble that came out with the rule is hard to get into because it goes back and forth. Here's what industry said, here was the FAA's thinking, and you can get lost in all of that. So I know that that the SMS program office is sponsoring the advisory circular and another document, a notice or whatever, to address some of the more particulars of what the intent of these rules are. The one thing that we want to make sure is that don't read into or build into things that aren't required. Okay, because you can get very elaborate, right? You could get very elaborate with a code of ethics, but what are people going to remember from a code of ethics? You want to get to the point. You want to say, this is what our organization's foundations are, and you want to state it very succinctly, and something that you don't write, just to cut to the chase, don't write things for the FAA. You write it for your organization so you get the value from what you're doing in this with this rule. And there is a lot of value in the rule, not only in a safety sense, but in a business sense.
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
I was just gonna say, I think one of the best quotes I've heard from Keith, who is also a former FAA guy, is don't wait for the FAA to tell you what's good, tell the FAA what's good. And if I just wanted to put a plug in, because I know we have some people on this webinar that were not on our last one. Please feel free. There is a recording out that if you need the link, please let me know. But it was our former SMS webinar that went over it as a condition-based approach, really looking at the scalability, kind of what Dale was talking about. You don't want to just put things in there to put things in there. And you really do need to make it based on the conditions that you're operating within. You don't want to take some other program that doesn't fit the operations that you're there. And I think that that's really key and something that the FAA will definitely be looking at. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sort of. It just sort of segues into one of our other discussion points that we had prepared, which is sort of the difference when you submit something to the FAA from the old rule to the new rule. And the old rule, when a 121 carrier submitted their SMS to the FAA, there was a component of approval, whereas now, when you submit to the FAA, it's about acceptance. Keith or Dale, did you want to elaborate on that a little bit and the difference between approval versus acceptance?
Go ahead, Dale.
Well, we can, to make it really simple, because it gets more involved, is that most of the time approval is associated with certification. All right, your initial certification going through and demonstrating to the FAA that you have the capability to operate safe organization, meet the intent of the regulatory requirements, and basically offer your product or service to the public. All right. When we get into added programs, a lot of time, most of those added programs, and we could say SMS, while it's not a program, it's a management system, but it's an add-on to your certification if you are certified. It basically is under an acceptance process. What gets convoluted in our guidance material is that there are two types of acceptance. One looks like approval. All right, so there's language that says it has to be acceptable to the administrator. Okay, the other one is accepted by the administrator. All right, so when you get into accepted by the administrator, you're really thinking about kind of a pre-approval process. And you do the back and forth. Keith, you mentioned that right up at the beginning of the webinar, is that we are programmed to think about this back and forth all the time. All right. That's not the way this acceptance process is going to be. You basically say, I have an SMS in that 36-month period. I have implemented to the best of my ability and understanding the intent of the regulation and meeting the regulatory intent with the processes I put in place. I have an SMS. And then we get into that. Then the FAA in its regular surveillance cycle will come out and look at certain aspects. They may not get through all the requirements of Part 5 on a visit, because we know that some of those visits are very time limited, right? And there's a large scope of information that they may have to look at during a base inspection. Some of you only get, looked at once a year, and it may be a half a day because of other obligations by the principal operations and, the principal inspectors. So, but they will work their way through. Over time, they will see everything and how it interfaces. So I would expect when you get your next inspection, they will ask you, the first question they probably will ask is, have you had any changes in your organization? Just flat out and simple, because what is change related to in the rule? A safety risk management process, right? An SRM. So, the dialogue will start out with what kind of changes are you making, and then get into more in depth on certain aspects of the safety management system requirements.
So for my colleagues on the panel, one of the questions I've been asked is Keith, I've already been involved in the SMS program office voluntary project. You know, I've implemented, I've got some kind of acceptance from them. How would you recommend that we do some of the things, just the new requirements like the ethics statement? Do we incorporate that into the safety policy? Has that got to be a standalone document? My recommendation to many, and you guys may view it differently, that we actually try to incorporate that into the safety policy. I think that would be a pretty straightforward way to do that. And me, I'm kind of a simpleton. You know, I really want to know what is the best way to accomplish a lot of this stuff that we're actually talking about. So I know there's lots of questions out there around. I already have an SMS. I've used a variety of other organizations, and it meets the intent of the Part 5. What I would say is, you know, you need to go back and look at the new requirements and kind of differentiate between what you have and what the new requirements are. Understanding the new requirements and a performance-based way or methodology to get to that satisfaction, that requirement, to me it's invaluable. You have to do that. You have to do the work to be able to do that. Any thoughts on that, Brad and Steve, Dale?
Keith, one thing I was going to say is we did get a question that's very similar to like that in the chat. And as we turn it over to the other panelists to answer, you know, the question was, are any companies that are accepted into the SMS voluntary program, are they only required now to submit the declaration of compliance, or are there additional requirements? I know you said that you mentioned that other requirements, and I'd love for our other panelists to kind of go into detail that you can't just that it's not just, you don't just have your lawyer fill out the declaration of compliance and submit it. You really do need to be looking at these new requirements, and also making sure that you still meet some of these things. You might have done something in the past, but making sure that it's still ongoing. So thoughts on that, y'all?
So a couple of things there. Table 1 within the document that's on its way to the Federal Register right now lays out the changes in the NPRM or in the new Part 5 rule as compared to the old one. We already touched on the ethics statement. I'm sorry, declaration of, I'm confusing my terms here. The declaration of compliance and the ethics component. With one of the other changes that sort of stood out is the definition of hazard has changed slightly within the new rule. Keith, to your point on where do you put that ethics component? Is that in the safety policy? And maybe I missed it, but I don't know that it's defined anywhere specifically as to where that goes, just that you have to have it. I would expect, to your point, Dale, that we're going to see on the 28th, when those additional resources and guidance come out from the FAA pertaining to this, that they might add some specificity on where to put the new components and how they fit into your existing SMS if you already had one under the voluntary program.
I think they will provide examples, but it's up to the operator to determine where it fits best in their organization. Before I left the FAA, there was a lot of discussion as to why do we even have to add an ethics component when we already have the safety policy, which in a sense is an ethics position with regards to how we feel about safety in our organization. So, but it was like I said, I brought it up specifically that it was a congressional mandate. So if they say they're going to be an ethics statement, there's going to be one in there. And so it was added. Now, what type of statement or policy statement that you choose to make out of that will be completely up to the operator. One thing I want to say about policy is used by the rule and the FAA in a very general term. Policy can be anything that you have in your organization that's basically written down, or something, a process that you live by that even wouldn't be written down. So policy is broad spectrum. So your safety objectives may not be tucked underneath your ethics statement, safety policy statement. Then I've got a list of safety objectives, and then I've got to have this and this and this, and it's got to be on this great big sheet of paper, and it's got to take up a whole wall, to sit there and have all this stuff to satisfy the FAA. it really comes down that the policy is that sometimes what, on part of your policy, you want people to remember that safety is very important in the organization. That might be a logo on a coffee cup, right? That's part of your policy. That becomes part of your policy. Your safety objectives may be listed. There are a lot of times safety objectives are changed. Those can be recorded in a different area of your policy manual if you have one. You know what I'm saying? So policy is a very general statement. The policy has to include these things, but they don't have to be all tucked under, a certain format. It's totally up to you how you've established and run your business with regards to your documentation. Does that make any sense at all?
It does, and I think it's very helpful, and it kind of goes back to what you and Keith were talking about at the beginning, which is be mindful of what you submit. Don't overly complicate it. You are going to be held to what you submit as your compliance under your declaration of compliance. What you write down is what you'll be expected to do from the FAA's perspective. And again, it's not an approval process, it's an acceptance process. If you say you're going to do X, Y, and Z, then when the FAA comes through as part of their routine visits, they ought to see X, Y, and Z.
And just a point, I do see some in the audience that might have their hands raised. I'm not able to click on you to speak in this forum, but if you would like to make a point or if you would like to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom. We want to make sure we get to you and answer those points. And one thing that we'd already discussed a little bit, but that we got a more specific question on is states the organization description is only required for part 121 as far as we understood, correct? System analysis, meaning the system description, is still applicable in the SRM flow chart. Can anyone speak to that?
So that is an exact portion of the process around safety risk management. You have to know what the system is required to do, what you're trying to do. That is required. Two really separate things. But that is a requirement for SRM. It's a very preliminary step in SRM in documenting exactly what that process is and what the outcomes are as you start to look for hazards and then do a risk assessment on that. Dale, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've got two things that we're dealing with regards to system analysis now. We have that organizational system description. And then what we have is we have a system description as part of the SRM process. Sorry, my tongue got ahead of my lips there. So in the organizational concept, when we look at ourselves, we look at it at a very high level, right? What's our organizational chart look like? How are we structured? What are we trying to accomplish with our service or our product? We're looking at ourselves very broad-based, and we're trying to describe ourselves as a business and how we will fit in these management system concepts, because this isn't just about safety. This is about managing your organization, and it's good across the board because it's all the requirements in Part 5 primarily were taken from other management system constructs that are already out there, like the ISO 9001 quality management systems and others, many others, okay? But they all have common threads of management system. So when you get into SRM, when you get away from that large, big picture view, you're starting, you want to disposition usually a problem. Okay, let's start out. Corrective action is the big one, right? I have a problem, I have to disposition. So how does this system description help me with disposing of that problem or coming to some conclusion on how I will manage the risk and make the appropriate corrections? That's when you narrow your focus down and say, what is the process and what am I trying to achieve from the process? And I like to use a flow chart. I like to say, here's the beginning of the process. And I don't get all hung up with the different diagrams of whether I'm going to use the decision block or whether I'm going to use a square, a diamond or whatever. I just sit there and go across the page and I say, this is where the process starts. This is where the process ends. Here's the basic components of that process. And here are the interfaces. Interfaces is a big change, is one of the big mentioned changes it was always assumed that we would include interfaces, right? How can I make decisions in the closet by myself? You really have to have the experts that to interface with to say, I think this is what's happening. You're the expert. Can you tell me if that's what's happening? Because I'm making a lot of assumptions in that process that may or may not be true. So what you're trying to do with that system description then is to compartmentalize or block out what you're trying to solve. So if I have a maintenance problem, for example, I'm missing ADs. That's what I want to block out. What is my AD process? How do the ADs come into my system? How do they process? How do I deliberate out the other end to get to the end of the process that I've complied with ADs? All right. So that's where your system description, words like purpose and function of the system, you're trying to get localized so that you're not saying, oh, here I am back at this high level trying to describe my whole organization again. That was not the intent in that SRM piece or requirement for you to go back up to a high level. They wanted you to start focusing down on the system. So there's another universal term, right? System can be high level. I run XYZ, charter service, or it can be right down to a few people and a few process items that they do. All right. So system is one of those other big words that can confuse you when you're trying to, take the words from the paper and put them into practice. Hopefully that made some sense.
So differentiate, it really is about scope and focus in each one of those particular terms. It's about scope and focus, and I thought you've done a very nice job in describing that.
Perfect. And so as we're, kind of getting into different wording and things, I know that it can be confusing. It can be overwhelming as we saw the rule come out. I'm sure a lot of us were excited to see it was dropped sooner than I think a lot of us thought it would be. But I know that it also, kind of places as a mode of what all do I need to do? So as we know this, or my understanding is that this was supposed to be a zero cost to the FAA. So, they were trying to work this into the oversight process. In that regard, what, if you can just very clearly say, what are the submission requirements and what do you have to show the FAA what do you have to show the FAA when they show up at your facility?
So really at the end of the 36 months, you've really got to basically provide them with, and I keep referring to it as a compliance statement because certification comes back to mind. I can't help it. I don't know why they changed it back, but you're going to have to provide that particular document. And the other question we continue to get to is not only are you building or putting in the new aspects of the new Part 5 for a 135 operator, but this is going to affect your manuals also. So the manual acceptance or approval is going to have to go through the same normal process. So again, from my perspective, first thing is thoroughly understanding what the new Part 5 requirements are. Even though you went through the SMS process using the old Part 5 that was required for 121, I think understanding this and the gap analysis to me is a great place to start. Thoroughly understanding that, going back through, clearly looking at each one of your processes predicated around the 4 elements, and then deciding on exactly where the gaps are and trying to figure out what it's going to take to fill those gaps. And again, Dale's advice, Steve's advice, be brief and be simple in adding those new processes in. It is a performance-based rules, meaning there are many ways to yes, and there's many ways to good. This is an opportunity for the industry to take a leadership role in safety. But I'd like for you to consider one other thing while I've got the floor. Get rid of the first S. Really, this is a management system. And Dale and I have had numerous conversations about this. This is one thing the FAA done really, really well. They had to stay in the safety lane. This is about management of your particular processes to increased efficiencies. Increased efficiencies get you more economical value, but I would say that safety also comes along with that as a byproduct. Any thoughts from my colleagues?
One thing I'd like you to clarify, because Keith, you did mention on the manuals, so after 36 months, I mean, obviously, we're looking at the SMS manuals, making sure that they are up to date, making sure that they meet these requirements. But the question that we got is, will that be an accepted document technically after this, the 36 month compliance timeline, or will it be effective immediately that it becomes an accepted document, or will it be an accepted document at all?
That's a great question. I think there's going to be some more explanation. We're going to need some more explanation from
I
the.
would say the key thing to that question specifically, if you have updated your SMS manual to reflect the changes in the new rule, then it would be an accepted document once you submit it. Once you submit that document, then you enter the regulatory environment. Is that correct? It's not something that happens before.
So let's differentiate the management system itself. You can do it in a very ways. You can have one manual that covers all the aspects of that if you have a smaller operation. But typically what I have seen in many operations, a lot of the process required by Part 5 is embedded in various manuals. Some manuals are approved, some manuals are accepted, not all are. So the management system as a whole, the safety management system, I would say that, they're going to accept that. But once you turn the required documentation in and tell the FAA, I am complete, that's when you slip into a regulatory environment. So the next day, 24 hours later, they're coming in on routine surveillance and they find that things are not as you say they are, then there could be a regulatory issue, a regulatory problem. Dale?
Yeah, I think you are spot on. Both of you are spot on with regards to, this isn't a big deal about the acceptance. The issue is regulatory compliance. So it is accepted as soon as you basically submit it and make a declaration. You aren't submitting anything. The FAA basically probably is not, when I left the office, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the FAA right now, but when I left the office, the thought was that there would not be any design assessments to add more burden onto the FAA inspector prior to the performance visit. All right. So there isn't that old notion that I've got to submit all my manual system to them. They're going to do a complete review of all my documentation, and then they're going to come out here and test me on it. All right. It's basically, when you say you have an SMS, you have an SMS that's going to be regulatory compliance based. If there are issues with regards to understanding the implementation that you did as an operator versus a different interpretation by the FAA, there will be that conversation. Obviously, the compliance program that we have now with the FAA, if there are compliance issues, it's, we don't come out here I go. I just wrote my 2023 on that check. When the FAA comes out, there's more of a just culture here with regards to getting it right, as opposed to, penalizing someone for getting it wrong. And so we have the mechanisms in place to be regulatory compliant without, the punitive issues that have occurred in the past. So everyone is just looking for compliance and improved performance, as you state, Keith, is that it's really about the performance. We're looking for the performance outcomes as dictating the effectiveness of your SMS. And that's really key in this whole thing. Is it actually producing some effective outputs with what you implemented?
Thank you so much, Dale. And I did want to clarify for those, I know that we keep saying 36 months. So the date that you must be in compliance is May 28th of 2027. Your documents must be submitted. But as Keith mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you don't want to be waiting around to the last month trying to get this in. There's a reason the FAA gave you 36 months. Work every day towards this. Don't wait till the very end. Ethan, one question I've seen get thrown a lot at different events I've been at is, can the Part 135 operator simply say we meet ICAO standards for SMS after we've submitted our program to the FAA?
And we say we meet ICAO standards. Well, Dale, unless has been updates, there has been a effort to ensure congruency between ICAO SMS requirements, which I think are probably at a more elementary level or less, less onerous requirements than what the Part 5 is. If you meet Part 5, you naturally are going to meet the ICAO requirements. And I know there was a lot of efforts. I know that you had a lot of discussions with the ICAO and making that so. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we were really close back in the 121 mandatory Part 5 days to get the EU to recognize the SMS voluntary program as being a level of equivalency or meeting ICAO requirements. One thing I'd like to point out on that is once you meet the requirements, you do meet the requirements, right? If Part 5, the original Part 5, met the ICAO requirements, when you start providing exemptions or deviations from the old Part 5, then you will need to verify versus the ICAO requirements that you still have all the requirements met. Does that make sense? Is that now we have exemptions for single pilot. Right now, so some of those requirements in the old Part 5 rule made sure that we met ICAO requirements. We do have exemptions now in the new Part 5 for the single pilot operator, and I like the way you demonstrated. The FAA will work in its box. This is where the regulations help you, is that if you're identified as a single pilot operator, you're a single pilot operation. And you can then go to this rule and say, these are exemptions I can leverage in my organization, the communication piece, basically. All right. For ICAO, if there is requirements in the ICAO language or in the ICAO framework that you are now exempted under the new Part 5, then you'll have to take that in consideration if in fact some of the other countries other than EASA starts to say you have to have an SMS that's in compliance with the ICAO requirements. Are you understanding my thoughts there? Is as you exempt yourself, you're not only exempting yourself from application, but you don't want to exempt yourself from being ICAO compliant. So it's really important that even though you can leverage exemptions, if you want to be sure that you're in compliance with ICAO framework, that you don't exempt yourself out of that status, even though you can. All right. And I haven't gone through to determine if those exemptions have actually caused that to happen or not. But I know under the old Part 5, we were in a position where you would meet ICAO requirements. EASA right now requires a self-declaration, much like what the FAA is modeling in this new application, is that you just declare that you're compliant in the EASA application process for their authorization. You do the same thing. You basically declare you have an SMS, and then their regulators will come and look at you at certain intervals. It may take them forever to do that. You may not get the ramp check, or you may not, something like that may not happen, but when they do an inspection on your operation, they will cover the framework and the SMS requirements. So that's something that we just, bring up as an awareness, is that be sure and look at the rule. If you're flying international operations, be sure that you don't exempt yourself out of something that would be a requirement under the ICAO framework.
Thank you so much, Dale. And Jillian, if we could move just to the next slide. I think that something that a lot of us have been thinking about safety for a while, but you really need to make sure that your accountable executive for SMS and for safety is fully trained on this. And so, Brandon, why don't you talk a little bit about one of the offerings that that NATA has here?
Sure, Jenny. Several years ago, NATA developed a partnership with, I'm going to rattle off a couple acronyms here, with the DOT and TSI. So DOT, Department of Transportation, the Transportation Safety Institute, to develop and implement a NATA specific certification called the ATSM. which is the Air Transport Safety Manager certification. So what this is, that this ATSM course takes place in the same classroom, same instructors as the TSI, the Transportation Safety Institute Safety Management System course. It is a 1-week course. And what it does, it encompasses, of course, all 4 components of an SMS. So your policy and your SRM, your SA, and your promotion as well. There's also human factors that are involved with this ATSM certification, as well as a train the trainer, which is on the very last day. But it takes each one of those components into roughly 4-hour segments. And to give an example of the foundational level of those courses, for example, if you go through the human factors for the ATSM course, human factors during the ATSM course is roughly 4 hours. You can get a much higher degree of education in human factors by taking this outside of the ATSM, which is a 3-day course. 3-day courses are available through human factors, root cause analysis, and as well as some aircraft investigation, incidents, accidents, and also your emergency response plan, which is, of course, required for your SMS. But as you can see there, these are the next several dates. Most of those classes take place in Oklahoma City at the Mike Mahoney Aeronautical Center at the FAA headquarters in Oklahoma City. And there is one for Destin that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We just had one in Anchorage, Alaska. So we try and have those courses throughout the country and in different destinations to ensure that everybody has a chance to entertain their time off and get to those courses. But Air Transport Safety Manager certification is a 1-week SMS course, and it is comprehensive, very engaging. And Jenny, I'm sure you can speak to this. It's on day 1. It's very engaging and interactive. It's a really fun course. Some of the instructors, so Transportation Safety Institute has a cadre of instructors that have a lot of acronyms behind their name. There's Embry-Riddle instructors. There's also some ex-fighter pilots that have moved on, of course, retired military, and now they're into the human factors and risk management. Various professionals around the industry and well as outside the industry, but still in that, as Keith mentioned earlier, it's a management system. We just happen to manage safety because SMSs are in other industries as well. So outside industries as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon. And just make sure if you are a NATA member that you sign up using our site because you will get a discount for this course. So that is a benefit to NATA membership. Go ahead, Steve.
One thing I wanted to elaborate on top of this ATSM certification is the course is not designed just for people who are brand new and looking to set up an SMS. It's for people who already have an SMS and are looking to mature it or to grow it and improve upon it. So I know, Brandon, you went to the class, I went to the class, Jenny, you went to the class. I think everybody here on this call has been to the class, and there's always a diverse range of attendees. It's folks who are brand new and just stepping into the SMS world, and people who already have a mature SMS and looking to grow and expand their knowledge. So, a tremendous course, lots of expertise and valuable information. And again, like you said, Jenny, through the NATA website, you can sign up for the Air Transport Safety Manager certification and get registered for that course.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I will mention that the majority of my class was also FAA. So you will get a lot of face time with FAA attendees, which now I want to kind of go in a little bit of a different direction. I know we all love our friends at the FAA, especially those that have joined us to listen in today. However, I know that at least from some of the conversations I've been having, we want to know how, Keith and Dale, how you guys expect that the FAA will be training their inspectors and auditors on the new rule. You know, I've been, people have mentioned standardization concerns, and as well as we got a question about how do you think the FAA is going to measure this compliance initially when the operator has just gotten started, has just very little data and activity in their SMS. So if you guys can talk about from the FAA perspective, how you think this is going to go and how they're going to be training their workforce, that would be great.
So I'll just start and I'll let Dale finish because he has fresher information. We've had a lot of discussions with some of the senior executives around training, process, procedure for the inspector, 135 inspector workforce. As we all know, 135 aviation safety inspectors have multiple certificates, large complex certificates, but smaller certificates also. So there's a whole spectrum. It runs the gambit of operations. So they're very, very busy. So where do we start these inspectors at? And this is the discussion we have. Do we start them at the very basics and provide foundational information like we did the initial cadre of inspectors that received the training? Or do we take what we've learned thus far and we kind of accelerate them? So I will tell you that the 135 inspector workforce has not received formal training. A smattering has, but not a lot. So I think that is an outlier, and I think we need to be on guard with that because at the end of the day, industry knows more about this because they've been actioning this management system for quite some time. Many of the operators on this call today has already taken the steps to put a safety management system in place, where they've done it themselves, or they had help, or they used other third-party vendors to do that. So they've got the value in that going already. So they're going to have to take on that leadership role. But as far as the inspector workforce getting trained today, I am not aware of any effort ongoing in that. Dale?
Well, I know that the SMS program office, one of the branch offices in AFS 900, are working diligently to get our inspector workforce up to speed and have a lot of products that they're developing to basically educate the workforce and seek that standardization. I think what is really important is that our FAA inspectors are always trained to the requirements and the intent of requirement, and also guidance in the 8900.1, which is available to everybody, the public. Anybody can look at that document, 8900.1, to see what the FAA intent and what the FAA inspector has to do and the performance of their job function. So that, I mean, we have a box we work in, all right? What happens on occasion is that we creep out of our box, and here we go. I just said we, so I did the 2023, wrote the check again. What happens sometimes is that the FAA folks are aviation professionals also, and we're all a product of what we've experienced, what we've seen, what we've learned, right? So while I may have an opinion that I don't think what you wrote will work, that's my opinion. If you wrote to the rule, you wrote to your business model, and you say, this is what's going to work for me, I have to respect that. Or an FAA inspector has to respect that too. And so therefore, they work within that rule, they work within those capacities. If there becomes a difference, or let's just say a professional differences in your conversation, that's where you always have to migrate to, is what does the rule say? What is the intent of the rule? And am I, the operator, meeting that? And those are how the conversation should go. So I think standardization, standardization is kind of a floater in there, but we all should come to the same conclusion with civil conversation on what is the intent and what's the requirement. And I think you'll do very well with that.
Thank you so much, Dale. I was going to just have Jillian go to the next slide really quick and kind of touch on a point that you mentioned, but that the FAA is interested. They don't want there to be a lack of standardization. The FAA's goal is not to make this difficult. They do want the standardization. And, that is one benefit of being a NATA member, is that, if you are having trouble with this, you can come, and we, as Keith has mentioned, we do have ongoing conversations with many areas with the FAA and the executive level offices. But if you want to come and talk or ask questions in person, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we have the NATA Air Charter Summit, June 25th, Oklahoma City. And our keynote again is Mr. David Bolter, the FAA's Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety. And then you'll also see that we have the SMS office going to be there, as well as we have a person from TSI, the organization that Brandon mentioned, the Transportation Safety Institute. So they really will be able to speak to this as well. And throughout all of the sessions, we have different government officials that will be able to answer a lot of questions that are ongoing. Keith, did you have something you wanted to say on that point?
I did. There was really a good question that was asked, and I kind of glossed over, so I apologize for that. One of the questions that was asked is initially, when the FA comes in on routine surveillance, how are they going to assess, if there's no data being collected on SRM or SA, how are they going to assess those processes are working? Me personally, and I'm putting on an inspector's hat now, the first thing that I would ask is, have you been involved in the voluntary program project? Have you got any kind of authorization, acceptance from the SMS program and your local FA inspectors? If you have, you should have some kind of data already collected, because you clearly demonstrated that you have the tentacles of those SRM and SA, Safety Risk Management, Safety Assurance. If you had not been involved in those before, then I would say as an inspector, you'd have to take into account. First thing I would look at is documented process, interfaces. Do you have a documented process in place? And what's the interoperability between safety risk management and safety assurance? Is the safety assurance feeding the SRM? Have there been changes? If there have been, are you using your process? So until the data is collected, if you hadn't been doing it before, you really can't ascertain, is it really valid or not? You just look at the process itself. But if you've been involved in the pilot project, you've been doing these other things, you should have some semblance of data or activity around SRM and SA.
Thank you so much, Keith. Another question that we got was, well, first of all, I'm getting a couple different questions in here saying if you guys, we will be sending out this recording as well, in case you want to pass it along. But if for some reason you do not receive an email or you want to request it, please feel free to send me an email, jurban, URBAN @nata.aero. You can also find it on the website, but we will be sending that out. We have time for probably one more question. One of the questions that we got is, how does this requirement impact vendors of Part 135 operators? Does it impact it? And, what should we be thinking about there?
I think that's a great question.
Sure, yeah, it is. So one of the key distinctions that came out in the new rule is how those who are under the rule, and for our audience today, 135 operators, how are they going to interface with their vendors? So one of the key things that stood out to me was when it comes to hazard reporting. So under the new rule, if you are impacted by the rule, which obviously you're on this webinar, so you are, required to provide notice of the hazard to any interfacing person that, to the best of the identifying organization's knowledge, could address the hazard or mitigate the risk. And that's under section 5.57. So essentially, as far as vendors are concerned, especially, NATA or NATA, sorry, I did it at least once. NATA has a large segment of our membership is FBOs. And this is something that we hear a lot about from our members in the FBO spaces. How can they be prepared, or how is this new rule going to affect them? And it really comes down to that hazard reporting, because they are interfacing with 135 operators. If there's a hazard that is affected or impacted by the FBO's operations, they should be expect to be a part of that reporting process. So the operator would need to notify the FBO or maintenance operator, whoever it is. An interfacing person or organization is the language that they use. And secondly, under 5.71 Alpha 8 is a new requirement for 135 operators to investigate hazards when they are notified by them, by outside organizations. So it's broadening the scope a little bit. It's no longer just an internal operation. There's going to be interfaces between vendors and external groups. The intent here is really to include a larger group in the safety effort. I think you touched on that earlier, Dale, especially with the SMS requirements for larger Part 139 certificated airports. They have an SMS requirement as well. It's really to encourage dialogue between operators and their vendors around safety, to increase data and pertinent information. So if you are not affected by this rule, but you're a vendor that interfaces with with those who are, then you can expect to have an increased dialogue when it comes to hazard reporting. For those that are impacted by this rule, and NATA or NATA has several strategic partners that we work with that offer products and services that can assist with simplifying and digitizing your SMS responsibilities. Of course, our friends over at Polaris Aero through their Vocus program, and then iReport Source. Each one of those are available to NATA members, and we encourage you, of course, to let them know that we recommended you if you give them a call.
So Steve, would you say that those two strategic partners that we have could help to satisfy part of that requirement for a 24-month?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Keith. So one of the record keeping requirements in the new rule is that you have to maintain records for 24 months. It's a digital era, not to say that, paper systems don't work, but there's a way to do it better. And absolutely, when you digitize your processes and your reporting, it makes it a lot simpler to meet that record keeping requirement.
Thanks so much, Steve. To wrap it up, Keith, I'd love for you to touch a little bit on our strategic partnership with the KGG group. I believe that might be on the next slide.
Yeah, it is. So NATA has, thanks Steve, you got me saying it too. Keller Giles Group, and the name Giles probably resonates with a lot of FAA people because Carol Giles was an executive in the maintenance division. She has hence got out, become a consultant. Only thing it requires to become a consultant is a broken pencil and a briefcase joke. She is helping, assisting in certification and any kind of SMS for the evaluation before the FAA comes in, those kinds of things. So we do have a strategic partnership with this particular group, and that will be a PR coming out probably this week to talk about that. But matter of fact, there's already been some interest in the Keller Giles Group providing some assistance, some guidance, some consulting around SMS for larger operators. So if we can help with that, please contact me or Steve, Brandon, Jenny Ann, and we'll get you guys hooked up on that. So
thank you so much, Keith. So I know that there was a few questions we couldn't get to, but we are planning after the new information comes out on May 28th, and we've had time to digest this. We are planning on doing another webinar that will go over more information then. So we'll try to get to your questions, but also feel free to come to the Air Charter Summit and get them answered as well. But I really appreciate Dale, you joining us as well as my colleagues. And that is exactly time. So thank you all so much for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful Thursday.
great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.